So I wanted to give an AI research into, is the problem with meth in white poverty areas similar to the problem with crack in black American areas? The crisis of methamphetamine in poor white communities and crack cocaine in black American communities share similarities in terms of economic despair and devastation to families, but they differ significantly in media portrayal, public perception, and most notably the government's criminal justice response. Both drugs emerged in marginalized, poverty-stricken areas, yet the response to meth has often been framed as a public health issue requiring treatment, while the crack epidemic was largely treated as a criminal issue, necessitating harsh long-term incarceration. Both epidemics thrived in areas with high poverty, high unemployment, and low social mobility. The media portrayed crack users as violent urban black criminals. Conversely, methamphetamine users were often constructed as rural white trash victims, a depiction that, while derogatory, often fostered more sympathy and focus on rehabilitation. Federal and local responses to now, the thing about it is amphetamines themselves, you think, well, it's all just racism. Not to exclude that, it's the kind of racism. So blacks are definitely going to side with blacks, and whites are going to side with whites to some extent. Not always. I mean, some people, anybody that's not themselves is just not themselves. But it's all on. But there's this, to some degree, that common origin of who people are, the identity, everything of people, and so. But the thing is, amphetamines, they were legal. That's a big difference than crack. Also, as methamphetamines. Now, amphetamines were legalized, sold in stores, and the housewives were all addicted to them, and it was a real bad problem. It had just, if you look into it, amphetamines once they were made illegal, that's when they came up with this meth, right? And so it's just, that's another reason why they sympathize, is because it's been around and it was legalized for a long time. Federal and local responses to the crack epidemic involved long mandatory minimum sentences. In contrast, the response to methamphetamine often focused on controlling chemical precursors like cold medicine. Also, it's not a foreign-made thing. It's meth is made in labs here. It used to be bikers. Now it is foreign-made. I mean, the Mexicans moved here and they control it all. Like cold medicine and providing treatment rather than punitive incarceration. Both drugs cause extreme health issues. Meth mouth versus lung heart issues with crack, and despite being considered white or black, drugs respectively both have respectively white or black drugs respectively both have caused widespread destruction across racial lines. Research just suggests that the disparate treatment, I don't even know how to say that. I've just never used that. Disparate treatment of these two epidemics is rooted in racial bias within the criminal justice system. I gotta get my teeth fixed. I've got these two teeth they yanked during COVID. and I got to get new ones, but I got to make my gums stronger so that so I'm using essential oils. But it usually, I'm a vocalist, a vocalist and a salesperson, and I'm used to enunciating with like really, really strong and kind of like a baritone. I mean, I have this musical perception of my voice, so when I hear my voice and I can't enunciate words, like when you sing a song, you hold it for like 4 counts, the one word or something, like, I mean, but you're making all these beautiful sounds come out, and I'm just I'm not trying to sing it out. I mean, I know how to talk and speak regular, but with 2 teeth missing, it sucks. So I'm getting kind of fed up with it, I guess. The crack epidemic resulted in disproportionate incarceration of black individuals, while the okay, so based on the rights of user. So AI is saying, while the methamphetamine crisis, particularly when viewed alongside the opioid crisis, has been met with a more health-oriented approach, highlighting a significant difference in how drug crises are treated based on the race of the user. But I'm saying, AI is saying this, and that doesn't make AI right, because AI is just, it's a learning thing. It's a learning tool. It has to learn, but it just seems. Let me write it in and see what it says. Do you think possibly? Trying to be careful here when I say it, the way I say it. Possibly that because amphetamines, at least it knows what I'm saying when I make mistakes in my spelling. Because I'm typing with thumbs, I'm just, obviously it's never going to be my thing. Do you think possibly that because amphetamines were legal years ago, that is why they are see, it's admitting there was a big difference. So basically, AI's been brainwashed into the racial thing too. And this historical legality, combined with the fact that meth was often used by white populations, contributed to a media narrative that frequently framed meth users as victims or people with a medical disease. In contrast, the crack epidemic was immediately framed through a criminal justice lens. So maybe the legal roots of amphetamines can't even type a P. Um, Now it's saying, yeah, you're right. Proof in how these drugs are treated is indeed tied to their distinct histories and the way their respective markets were perceived by the public and law enforcement. Medical versus illicit origins, amphetamine seems a learning tool. If you give it something to go on, amphetamines have a century-long history of legal medical use for conditions like asthma, obesity, and ADHD. This established a medical framework where the substance was seen as a tool that could be misused rather than something inherently criminal. Crack cocaine, conversely, never had a legal medical application in the U.S. and was introduced to the public as an entirely illicit street-only drug, which immediately triggered a criminal justice response. Market dynamics and violence. The crack war in the 1980s and 1990s, the crack market was characterized by highly visible open-air street sales, often linked to territorial disputes between gangs. This systemic violence led the public and policymakers to view crack as a threat to public safety, justifying aggressive policy. For years, methamphetamine production was often decentralized, small mom and pop home labs. While meth use is strongly linked to individual violence and property crime, it lacked the large-scale visible gang wars over territory that defined the crack era. Media and policy reports frequently associate crack with black urban communities and violent crime. In contrast, methamphetamine was often framed as a public health problem affecting poor white rural population. This framing signifies each crisis. There is perception of modern federal laws have largely equalized the mandatory. Okay, so let's back to notes. While there are structural similarities in how both groups dominated their respective drug markets, the nature of their involvement. This is were biker gangs involved with meth similar to black gangs' involvement with crack? While there are structural similarities in how both groups dominated their respective drug markets, the nature of their involvement differed in terms of production control, distribution scale, and organizational structure. Production versus distribution. Biker gangs producers in the 1970s and 80s, outlaw motorcycle gangs like the Hells Angels and Pagans were vertical organizations. They didn't just sell the drug, they were among the first to manufacture it in clandestine labs, often using industrial chemicals like P2P. In fact, the term crank is what I remember meth was. There was everywhere. Everybody was on crank. The preacher's daughter, the preacher's son's on crank. The judge's son in town, he got caught selling crank. The term crank originated from bikers hiding meth in the crankshafts of their modest motorcycles. Black urban gangs. During the crack era, urban gangs typically acted as the last mile of the supply chain. They did not manufacture the raw cocaine, which came from South American cartels, but were responsible for converting powder into crack and managing high-volume street-level sales. Geographic reach and market control. Biker gangs controlled the meth tried across the West Coast and Northwest at their peak. Some estimates suggest that the Hells Angels controlled up to 90% of the meth trade in Northern California. Black gangs often operated in highly concentrated urban territories, while some larger gangs like the Black Keystone Nation eventually expanded across multiple states. Their primary power was rooted in controlling specific city blocks and housing projects. Let's see. So it says biker gang, exclusive, lifelong, with strict bylaws and international chapters, often oversee primary tactics, sophisticated conspiratorial operations use legitimate business, friends, bars, massage. Overt gangs would do though. Saleable sales often more visible to the public. Law enforcement viewed as sophisticated criminal enterprise and often using counter surveillance and legal intimidation. Targeted by broken windows, police tough broken windows, policing and tough on crime legislation like mandatory minimums. Transition to cartels. Both groups eventually saw their dominance challenged by Mexican cartels. By the 1990s, cartels moved from being mere suppliers of raw materials to controlling the high-purity ice meth market, forcing many biker gangs to shift from being primary producers to distributors or enforcers for the cartels. Oh my gosh, man. These Mexicans, and they got enough Mexicans come in, and then they vote the people in office, and that's how they got the power to do that. The biker gangs were so busy being anarchists, they weren't getting their own people in on things. But the Mexicans, they just go right ahead and take over and make it their own country, and then, start dealing drugs from the judge's office. Because the judge is a cartel or something, I don't. This is so dumb.